Didn't know they let dropouts in here. My father's words hit me before I even had a chance to hang up my coat. The snow was still melting off my shoulders, cold droplets running down the sleeves of my jacket, and the warmth of the house felt like it was mocking me instead of welcoming me. I froze in the doorway for a heartbeat too long, staring at him across the room, at the smirk that had always been so familiar yet so cruel. A few relatives snickered behind him like it was a private joke they'd all agreed on years ago, and for a moment, I felt invisible, exposed under the harsh glow of the chandelier, a ghost among the living. I forced myself to move, to step inside, to place the coat on the rack without trembling. "Hi," I mumbled, almost automatically, but the words didn't matter. They were just air between us. My father didn't respond, didn't even glance at me again. I slipped toward the corner of the dining room, where the draft came through the window, the seat farthest from the table. I told myself I was only here for a short visit, maybe a slice of pie, maybe a few minutes to appease my sister, Lydia, who had insisted I come this year. 10 minutes, that was all. Then I could escape before anyone else's judgment landed on me. My name is Marisol Dane, 28 years old, and I had built a company that grew from my college dorm room into a multi-million-dollar tech enterprise. I sold it last year, and yet, in my family's eyes, I was still the cautionary tale. I had dropped out of college at 20, yes, but I did it to follow an opportunity that would define my life. They didn't care about that. To them, I had failed. And here I was, standing in the center of the very room that had judged me for years, feeling the weight of their expectations and the sting of their dismissal all over again. Lydia had called me herself this year. She had begged, pleaded even, saying she missed me, that the family dinners weren't the same without me. She said Dad had softened, that he was trying. Against every instinct, I had agreed to think about it, to consider showing up. But now, hearing the words echo in the room, I questioned why I ever even considered it. Yet, some part of me, a mix of curiosity and defiance, made me stay. Maybe I wanted to see how far they'd go this time. Maybe I was tired of running from people who never bothered to keep up with who I had become. The dining room was packed. Tables stretched almost wall to wall, decked in beige and gold decorations that screamed company function rather than family warmth. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon from the candles was thick, almost suffocating. I passed by cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, their kids glued to tablets, eyes wide but absent, completely unaware of the tension simmering around them. My mother barely glanced at me, muttering, "Oh, you're here," before returning to a conversation about someone else's promotion. I slipped quietly into my seat, pretending to be invisible, as I had done so many times before. I could feel the eyes, the whispers, the judgment. Ben, my cousin, loudly boasted about his promotion, while his wife practically recited his resume. Laughter and polite clinking of glasses filled the room. I picked at a bread roll, staying silent, observing. I had perfected the art of invisibility in my own family, but tonight felt different. Tonight, I was armed with knowledge they didn't possess. Tonight, I knew something they didn't, and for the first time, I wondered how they would react when the truth surfaced. "Time for the family career check-in," Uncle Ron announced, raising his glass like it was part of the holiday ritual. Each person shared their achievements, promotions, titles. I waited for my turn, heart pounding, already knowing the moment would be charged. Lydia tried to skip over me, but I wasn't invisible anymore, not really. I was here, and for the first time in years, I wasn't planning to shrink. The words of my father lingered in my ears, sharp and biting. "Didn't know they let dropouts in here." And as I sipped my wine, I realized that this night wasn't just a holiday dinner. It was the beginning of a reckoning, a confrontation between who they thought I was and who I had become. The room buzzed with polite laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint scent of roasted turkey mixed with spiced cider. But for me, it was all a haze of judgment and quiet attacks. Family dinners had never been about warmth. They were about ranking, measuring, and reminding each other who was better or worse. My cousins talked loudly about promotions, pay raises, and vacation homes, their words coded in bragging, while their kids ignored the conversation, absorbed in tablets and earbuds. Every sentence seemed like another notch in the scoreboard my parents had been keeping for years. I sipped my wine slowly, pretending to chew on a bread roll, letting my eyes wander over the table. I had memorized this ritual of scrutiny, this silent scoring system. Yet tonight, something felt electric, as if the air itself was waiting for a spark. Lydia, sitting across from me, kept glancing nervously in my direction, her fingers twisting the napkin. She wanted to skip over me, to avoid any confrontation, to preserve her fragile peacekeeping role. But she hadn't anticipated Aaron. Aaron, her husband, leaned forward casually, asking, "So, Marisol, where exactly do you work these days?" The question hung in the air, casual yet loaded, a trap I could have sidestepped with a vague answer, a made-up consulting gig. But I was tired of hiding, tired of pretending my accomplishments were irrelevant. I named the company. Silence swallowed the room instantly. The laughter froze mid-chime. Conversations halted. Even the youngest cousins lifted their eyes, sensing the shift in energy. Aaron blinked, his face betraying a mix of disbelief and dawning realization. "Wait, you're the CEO?" His voice cracked slightly. "You founded this?" My chest tightened, the thrill of being finally seen mingling with a sharp sting of long-buried resentment. Heads turned, my parents' faces tightening like they'd bitten into something unexpectedly sour. For years, they had labeled me a dropout, a failure, an embarrassment. Now, their carefully constructed narrative teetered. "Yeah," I said flatly, letting the weight of the words settle. "I built it from scratch, sold it last year, went public." A couple of relatives murmured, uncertain whether to laugh or gasp. My father's fork paused midair, his expression a mixture of shock, denial, and that familiar, impossible-to-read look he reserved for moments when someone threatened his version of reality. My mother's eyes widened, blinking rapidly as if she had just witnessed a phenomenon she didn't know how to classify. "Wait, what?" Lydia whispered under her breath, almost as if she needed confirmation that I wasn't joking. I shrugged. "You never asked," I said softly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch. The message was clear. All those years of assumptions, dismissals, and sarcasm had built an illusion of my failure. That illusion was crumbling now, right in front of them. I could feel the subtle shifts in the room. Cousins leaning back, uncertain where to direct their attention. Aunts and uncles exchanging quick glances, and Lydia sitting rigidly, a mix of awe and guilt flickering across her features. For the first time, I felt the power in their gaze, the recognition that I wasn't what they had always told themselves I was. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. My father coughed, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Well, you never said anything before," he mumbled. His tone was defensive, a thin veneer over his discomfort. You quit school. You assumed I failed," I interrupted, calm but unwavering. "That's what you decided I was, years ago, and that version of me didn't exist beyond your assumptions. But here I am." The edges of my words cut through the murmurs like a knife, precise and cold. The tension thickened, pressing against my ribs. The room felt smaller, tighter, charged with unspoken judgments and the collapse of familiar hierarchies. Aaron looked between me and the rest of the table, his eyes wide, almost like he was trying to memorize the moment for posterity. The recognition in his gaze was sharp, visceral. He was seeing the person I had been all along, the person my family had refused to see, capable, determined, unapologetically successful. For a fraction of a second, I savored the reversal, the shift in energy. They were no longer in control. Tonight, the quiet authority of truth had taken the floor. I leaned back slightly, letting the room absorb the revelation, feeling the subtle tremor of disbelief ripple through my parents. The walls of judgment were cracking, and though the night was far from over, the first blow had landed. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every eye on me. The chatter of the room had vanished, replaced by a suffocating silence. "You want to know the truth?" I said, my voice steady but firm. "I started this company in my dorm room. I poured everything I had into it. Every late night, every risk, every failure along the way. I built it, took it public, sold it last year." My words hung in the air, sharper than the crystal glasses clinking nearby. My father's fork hovered midair. His eyes narrowed, disbelief and discomfort warring for dominance. My mother's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Lydia shifted in her seat, her hands clenched in her lap. Aaron's eyes were wide, still trying to process the revelation. For the first time, I felt a flicker of control, the subtle but undeniable power, that comes when someone can't dismiss your presence or accomplishments. All these years, you've assumed I failed, I continued, letting the words hit each person like a ripple across a still pond. You never asked what I was doing. You never celebrated any of it. You decided who I was, and anything outside that version of me didn't exist to you. My chest tightened with a mixture of anger, relief, and defiance. I had rehearsed this confrontation countless times in my head, but speaking it aloud carried a weight no rehearsal could mimic. My father snorted, a dry, dismissive sound that did nothing to mask the tension. All this fuss over a dorm project? You think that changes anything? You quit school. You walked away from what mattered. I didn't flinch. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice calm but unyielding. I didn't quit. I evolved. I made choices you couldn't understand, because your world is measured by degrees, titles, and appearances. I'm not here to fit into your narrow definition of success anymore. The room shifted. Even the cousins, pretending to check their phones, glanced up. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking to make anyone else comfortable. My mother tried to interject, her voice soft but trembling. Marisol, we just what? I cut in, my gaze steady. We just judged me without asking, without understanding, without giving me a chance to explain who I really am. My words echoed across the polished dining room table. The rich aroma of roasted turkey and cinnamon faded into the background as every ear tuned into the confrontation. Aaron, still seated next to Lydia, finally spoke, his tone careful, almost amazed. Wait, so you really built this company from scratch? Yes, I replied, letting the single word resonate. And yes, I'm the CEO, the founder. And no, I'm not ashamed, not anymore. The reactions were immediate. My father's jaw tightened. His habitual smirk faltered. My mother's eyes widened further, blinking like she was seeing a stranger in my body. Lydia looked like she wanted to disappear, but I could see her pride flicker behind the worry. I paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle, and then added, I'm done minimizing myself for your comfort. I'm done shrinking so you can feel superior. I am not a failure. I am not a cautionary tale. I've worked hard. I've built something that matters. And I will no longer let anyone dismiss my life, my choices, or my worth. The room was heavy with tension, a charged stillness that seemed to press down on every polished surface. Even the distant hum of the heater felt loud. For the first time in my life, I could see the subtle cracks in their composure, the quiet panic behind years of confidence and judgment. It wasn't triumph I felt, not exactly. It was recognition, raw and unfiltered, that the power dynamic had shifted. Tonight, I was no longer invisible. Tonight, I had taken the floor and declared, unequivocally, who I was. I closed the door behind me, and the quiet of my apartment felt almost foreign, a stark contrast to the suffocating scrutiny at the dinner table. The city lights of Seattle filtered through the blinds, painting lines of gold and silver across the hardwood floor. I sank into my armchair, coat still damp, and let the tension of the evening wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened by their expectations, yet the emptiness that accompanied that freedom was startling. I reached for the box on my desk, the one I'd kept tucked away for years, old letters from professors, journals filled with drafts and ideas, even notes from friends I hadn't spoken to in a decade. I pulled out a folded envelope, the familiar handwriting of my freshman year mentor staring back at me. I had written to apologize for leaving college, for stepping off the track everyone had told me to follow. His reply was simple, concise, yet it struck harder than anything my family had ever said. Marisol, you are not failing. You are simply outgrowing the room. Keep building. The rest will catch up eventually. I read it over and over, feeling the truth in it resonate deeper than any familial validation ever had. For the first time, I allowed myself to breathe without guilt, to untangle my sense of self from the narrow definitions they had imposed. I realized that my decision to leave college hadn't been reckless. It had been necessary, a step toward freedom, a step toward building something that mattered. I didn't need them to recognize it. I didn't need applause or acknowledgement. I only needed to acknowledge it myself. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of self-reflection and exploration. I walked the streets of Capitol Hill, slipping into bookstores I'd always passed by but never entered, letting the smell of aged paper and leather bindings fill me with a quiet satisfaction. I dug out my old typewriter from the storage closet, tapping out pages not for anyone else, but for the sound, the feel, the act of creation. Each sentence, each paragraph, felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd forgotten while trying to fit into someone else's expectations. I began mentoring young entrepreneurs I met through online forums and startup meetups. Kids like Jordan, 19, who had poured his heart into a clunky, barely functional app, yet refused to give up despite lacking support. Watching him pitch to investors, seeing his eyes light up when someone took his ideas seriously, it hit me harder than any salary or acquisition ever could. I was passing forward the message I had longed to hear. You are not broken. You do not have to fit the mold to be worthy. Sitting in my apartment one evening, watching the rain streak the city lights, I realized I was redesigning my own definition of success. It wasn't about headlines or financial statements anymore. It wasn't about outshining my cousins or proving anything to my parents. Success was measured in influence, in legacy, in the capacity to inspire and support others on paths that society might overlook. My career had been a vehicle, but the real work, the meaningful work, was building a framework where unconventional journeys were recognized, valued, and nurtured. And with that recognition came freedom. I let go of the compulsion to hide, to minimize, to stay small for the comfort of others. I didn't attend every optional board meeting, didn't reply instantly to every non-critical email. I allowed myself to step back, observe, reflect, and breathe. For the first time, my life wasn't a reaction to someone else's narrative. It was entirely my own. I could pursue what I wanted, how I wanted, without justification. As I closed my journal that night, the rain still tapping softly against the window, I smiled faintly. I had reclaimed my voice, my choices, and my power. I wasn't defined by the limitations others had set, nor by the judgment they had passed. I had survived scrutiny, criticism, and disbelief. And in that survival, in that quiet reclamation, I found not just freedom, but clarity. True success is not imposed. It's claimed, lived, and shared. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment, the familiar handwriting of my parents on the outside. I tore it open and scanned the contents, an offer to buy back the family home. At first glance, it seemed benign, almost conciliatory. But I recognized the truth immediately. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was a lifeline, a way for them to cover their financial mistakes without admitting weakness. I wasn't falling for it. I sat back in my chair, letting the city lights filter through the blinds, and started to plan. I didn't want revenge in the petty sense. I didn't want to humiliate or gloat. I wanted control, clarity, and justice on my terms. I contacted a shell company I had quietly set up years ago for property investments, completely anonymous. Through it, I approached the bank, negotiating quietly and efficiently. Within days, the house was mine, 20% below market value. No drama, no alerts, just business. I didn't evict my parents immediately. I let them stay, unaware of the transfer. The utilities remained paid. The mail continued uninterrupted. They moved through their routines, blissfully ignorant that the control had shifted. Outside, nothing had changed, but behind the scenes, I was orchestrating a transformation. This house, once a symbol of judgment and exclusion, would become a beacon of opportunity. I planned to turn it into a community hub for young, underserved entrepreneurs, a place where ideas could grow free from scrutiny, just like I had once wished for myself. I also created a scholarship fund for my sister's children, fully covering tuition wherever they chose to study. No strings attached, just a gesture of generosity because I still loved my family and wanted to give what they could never see they had failed to give me: support without judgment. When the letters finally reached my parents, I could almost hear their confusion through the phone calls and texts to Lydia. They realized only slowly that I hadn't just refused the offer. They hadn't even recognized that the house was no longer theirs to control. I let them stew in uncertainty for a moment, a mirror of the years I had spent under their disapproval. There was no cruelty in it, just equilibrium. Power was no longer in their hands. A few months later, the community project was underway. The old house buzzed with energy, young minds sketching plans, coding, strategizing, creating. Watching them, I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing I was building something enduring and meaningful, far beyond money or titles. I had redefined success for myself. It wasn't about proving anything to my parents anymore. It was about legacy, impact, and autonomy. I met my parents once afterward, briefly, for a holiday toast. They looked at me differently, their old narratives crumbling silently behind polite smiles. I didn't gloat. I simply spoke my truth. I'm free. I've built a life on my own terms. Their faces registered the words slowly, some discomfort, some awe. It wasn't closure they offered. It was acknowledgement, silent but real. I nodded, thanked them quietly, and turned away. For once, the burden of expectation had lifted, replaced by clarity and self-determination. Stepping out into the crisp Seattle night, the air smelled of pine and frost. The city lights sparkled on the wet streets, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: complete autonomy over my life, my choices, my legacy. I wasn't just Marisol Dane, the dropout they'd labeled me. I was the architect of my own story, the holder of my own power. And now, as I wrap up this story, I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. May you find your own freedom and clarity, your own voice, and the courage to define success on your own terms. If you've been inspired by Marisol's journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to hear more incredible stories from women sharing their paths to empowerment, resilience, and triumph.